materials from the earth into the air, from the air and the light into the earth. And they're of tremendous importance to the atmosphere of the world. And they enable us to occupy the earth. What happens in a tree is pretty mysterious, and we don't know much about it, but we can find out a bit about it. Little bits, you can gather a lot of little bits together. Some of you should start sort of assembling what you can find out about trees, because you find it in strange places. The tree, for instance, will take rain. The tree has an intimate connection with rain. Probably an essential connection, the interconnection here. Like all energy systems, there's a constant exchange between the tree and the clouds. This is not a spiritual exchange, it's an essential material exchange. It may be spiritual, but it looks like other things. When the rain comes into the tree will intercept all light rains. And the rains have to wet the tree. And to wet the tree, it may have to wet about 40 acres of leaf. Because the tree will have about that much leaf if it's a large evergreen. So first the rain must put a film of water across 40 acres before it can get through the tree. And the tree holds that very tight on the leaf at about 15 atmospheres, so that can't get away from the tree. So interception of light rains by trees, where the area is forested, can be total. And it's about 15% of all rains are intercepted by trees. Which is what the atmosphere gives to the tree. Then if interception is satisfied, the needs of interception is satisfied, then you get a through flow through the tree. Then the tree does something very different to the rain. It redirects the rain by reason of its own structure, and it may, for instance, put most of that rain at its periphery and some of it down the trunk. But it certainly redistributes the water very differently from an open field. And each tree does something very different with the water. This tree, for instance, will put most of the water in around here. So it redistributes the rain to suit its own needs. Once the water has been redirected and it's got through the tree, it falls out of the tree and is called through-fall. Now, if you catch the through-fall here in a cup or something, it is not rain. It's as different from rain as what goes down the plug in your bath is from what comes in through the tap. It contains 20 or 30 times the phosphates of rain. It contains a whole slew of trace elements, and it contains organic acids. It's the tree's bath water, and it's a much richer substance than rain. And the reason for that is that the tree is doing other things. It may have some electrostatic attraction to dusts, and certainly it can keep itself clean. The big failure with artificial trees is they get dusty. Los Angeles replaced all its real palms with artificial palms, but the cost of washing them every day was too great. So a live tree is much different thing from an artificial tree. A tree actually does things. It either repels or attracts dust, and it may repel or attract different ionized particles. So the through-fall is of very different quality. And it's true to say that in all the pastures out there, The only highly nutritious pastures are those near or below trees. And some trees, which we have specified as farmers' trees, will actually double pasture production or grain cropping. General group there are acacias and prosopis, mesquites, and all traditional farmers, those of you showing some interest in traditional systems, if you talk to a traditional Indian or Amerindian farmer, they both use prosopis, and they'll say, we cannot grow without trees. And they're right, you can't. You can't get any nutrient return. The trees have about 90% of their roots near the surface. Most of their roots where they put the water down. And they have about a few percent of their roots, maybe 10 or so, go very deep and draw on deep minerals. And these minerals come up, moisture is evaporated from the leaves, and many of the minerals remain on the leaf to be washed down in the through-fall. So through-fall contains several substances, some produced by the tree, some of the organic materials, some drawn from deep in the earth, and some are gathered from the atmosphere, from the flow of insects and insect frass and dust through the atmosphere. And some manufactured on the crown of the tree from incoming light. So through-fall is an interesting substance. Now we know almost nothing about the quality of through-fall in different trees. Where we have looked at one tree, the river red gum, Eucalyptus camaldulensis, it has tremendous input into soil nutrition. But we don't know much about any other tree. So we don't know much about the analysis of through-fall or its effect in the soils. I point out that it exists. When the through-fall gets through the tree, it soaks areas the tree wants to store water in and where it can access water with its roots. And it has some trouble here getting through. For every inch of humus that the tree holds, or for every 3 inches, we can absorb 1 inch of rain. So if you have you can walk through an old beech forest up to your knees in humus. So it can absorb a 3-inch episode of rain or 4-inch episode of rain, and the rain doesn't move. So this, in a proper forest, is actually a blanket of moisture. The tree itself is 98% water, or 93 to 98, depending on the species. So the tree is really, it's like we are. It's mainly water. Without our clothes, we'd probably seep away. And so the tree stands there more or less as a barrel of water, but it holds a great plate of water in the earth too. And the forest is in effect a lake that follows the hill profiles. And it's a substantial lake. If you see a heavy forest and take all the ash away and bring all the water held by the trees to the surface, you have a lake several feet deep that goes up and downhill across the landscape. This lake is generally ignored by people who do water balances. 40% of the tree is below the surface, has deep roots, down several metres, some down to 40 or 50 metres. That's as far as we've dug to see how far the roots go. Then we got sick of it. Only some species go this deep. And these form part of the soil humus. The roots, like the leaves or the branches, are eternally growing out, dying and redirecting themselves. So they may have a whole seasonal, they'll dive down and then they'll die off and then they'll grow up and feed at the surface from spring on and go down winter. So the roots are eternally dying and replacing themselves. So the tree, as much as the leaves are, so the tree is continually putting humus into this soil. And we know that humus lasts 5,000 years at least. So people talk about locking up carbon dioxide by cutting the forest down. But in fact, I think we forget how much CO2 is being locked up in the soils by the tree. It's a very active process of the tree in locking up CO2 in the soils. And that's where the long-term storage is. So we don't know much about that. There's very little written about that aspect of forests. But if you keep your eye out, you might keep finding things. Once the water gets through there and it takes a heavy rain episode, then it goes into the soil, infiltration, and there it has to satisfy the soil. Now, if there are trees, and there's a good ionic balance in the soil is composed of little particles, and it's little conglomerations of clay and humic minerals. And the water that comes through them has to satisfy the need of each of these. So it's bound on to the soil particles from, 4 atmospheres to 15 atmospheres. So the soil holds it up, holds it very tight. And the tree can take it off the soil particles down to this one. And that belongs just to the soil itself. So soil is never completely dry. It always has that film. And, not to your surprise, but living in the film on the soil are millions of aquatic organisms. Yeah. So the soil is full of small aquatic organisms. And some of them live right down there in on the 15 atmosphere zone, and they put a little whisker out so they can breathe, because it's very viscous there near the soil particles. Gases, of course, permeate the soil, and it's very essential to the gas composition that water does flow through. Excellent. Now, this is bound on so tightly that infiltration is very tightly bound for some meters, and only later do we actually get some form of groundwater flowing through. So forests have a tremendously moderating effect on water, and they're very conservative in storing water, excess water. Good. Now, why do they need all that water stored? The answer is they use it. That goes out again. So down it comes, and out it goes. And a very large tree needs, or can pump out 500, 800 gallons a day. Excessively large trees are 1,000 gallons a day. So the tree now returns unused water, this time distilled water, to the atmosphere. Okay? So that's its function. So it's in constant trade. Bringing down, holding water, and then returning it to the atmosphere. Okay, so water out. Now when it does that, it rehumidifies the airstream. And trees are responsible for about 3/4 of all rain. If, for instance, we take a coastal area where the only moisture in the wind is off the sea, and we get into trees, and we take the oxygen isotope here, O16 is the O16, it comes out of the sea, and we measure the number of that isotope in the first rains. Most of the rain is derived from the sea. But by the time we move inland and measure in the second series of rains inland, about 60% is derived from the trees, and it's oxygen isotope 18, which is specific to trees, the water exhaled from trees. That becomes 100% by the third rains inland. So inland rains in places like this depend entirely not on the ocean, but on the recycling of moisture from the soil by the trees. So without trees, your rainfall, 3 parts of your rainfall will disappear. The rivers wouldn't flow. No way that the Amazon can flow on the basis of the rain coming in from the sea. It has to be continually recycled. The Amazon balance doesn't add up. For the rain coming in is not the water coming out. It's far too excessive. Discharge of rivers is way above the potential for discharge of the rainfall. All these things are critical to your survival, you know. As you'll see, you know, if somebody says, you know, the year after we cut the trees down, water stopped, you say, oh yes, what would you expect, you bloody idiot? Right.
Could you sum up that statement one more time? The 3/4 of the water?
Yeah, about 3/4 of the water discharged from streams wouldn't be discharged unless the catchment was forested. Yeah, on onshore coasts.
Yeah, that's what the mama was doing.
Yeah, well, the mama got a lecture on this under an army tent.
You're talking about rivers everywhere.
Mamalaka?
There's people in Colombia,
Out of Harani? Kogi?
they're cutting the forest below them, and now they're
Yeah.
watershed.
Yeah. You know, nobody says, not only we want to cut the forest, we want to cut your water down too. And the Indians are saying to us, of Harani, are saying, why don't they say, we want to get rid of your water? Why don't they say, not that we want to log your trees, just want to get rid of your water, you know? Why don't they put it that way? So the Indians know it's the trees that feed the Amazon. Why should they not? You know?
And you said that happens because
of the return, the constant rehumidification. Any surplus water that the tree, beyond the trees need to grow itself, is returned to the atmosphere. There's a constant rehumidification of the airstream. And it's a large contribution to the airstream. I mean, what if you had all these pumps, you know, 700 pumps per acre, pumping out even 500 gallons a day? You're getting a lot of humidity back into the air.
Are the winds pushing it inland?
We haven't got to the winds yet. But here, yeah, I've shown an onshore wind, and then the Andes or something here. So most of the rainfall in, you know, from the central Amazon on is oxygenated.
Bill, is
Kelly.
condensation factored into this?
Not yet. Not yet. We're dealing with rain here. Rain. We get here when we get to winds, we get to condensation. Okay, so we're getting the water down, infiltration, and then aquifer flow. This will go to aquifers. Recharge of aquifers and recharge of streams will go very slowly. No water coming out springs in most areas is less than 1,000 years old. I would say average age of spring water is 5,000 years old. It went into the ground 5,000 years ago. Water travels very slowly through soils. If we get water in up here in a swale, it might come out at the foot of the hill in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. So what we're doing today has a long-term and ongoing effect. And it will come out in the river, main river system, maybe some of it in 1,000 years. So basically, when you drive a spike into the aquifer, not only are you robbing the future, but you're robbing your ancestors too. Very interesting, this society, how it robs both sides of its own existence. Yeah. The Ogrella aquifer is there because your ancestors maintained tree cover. And you rob it. It's a terrible thing to think you're robbing your grandmother as well as your grandchildren, isn't it? Yeah, right. Aquifers. If you take a genealogy, you're here at the base of your genealogical tree, right? and you give rise perhaps to another one, or maybe some of your genes go on. And so you're at, here's our thing again, isn't it? Okay? That's our system. But you're travelling on that equipotential surface in time, and that whole thing's travelling with you. But it's rather interesting that you are actually influencing your ancestors as much as your descendants. Did you think about that? I can't explain it. Here the things. That's one way, but another way, if this way, this is your inheritance. If that's your inheritance, that's your behaviour. You know, there's no one-way flow through any of these systems.
So in the inverse way, if you're robbing, you're also giving back to your ancestors something back.
Yeah. Yeah, and they let you down if you don't have any too. If you don't have any trees, your ancestors will let you down.
Also, you are your
Got a
ancestors,
bad gene back there. You are your ancestors.
You're robbing yourself.
And you are your descendants. It's a very interesting sort of metaphysical thing here. Yeah. I sit and look at it sometimes and think, what's going on here? You know? Anyhow, you know, I would like to put these little mind blinders in here, little mind blinders. Just look at that and think about it. Okay, this is all pretty mind blinding. And I can't say that we understand it. And we hardly have an outline grip on it. The tree is something more marvellous. How could you possibly be bothered to invent fairies or divas or angels when you have something as fantastic as a tree? Why would you want to invent miracles when you got one outside your bloody window? You can't understand that. You have to invent bloody angels because you can understand bloody angels. You're like a scientist. You can't measure anything that you don't make to measure. You have to make something before you can measure it. So what did you measure? What you're doing yourself. You can't measure a tree. Yeah. Spiritualists in the modern New Age sense are very like scientists. It's only what they invent that they can understand. They can't understand anything of anything out there. Colonic irrigation won't allow you to manage the landscape. Right. You know, it might if you stuck the nozzle in your ear and took it out here and washed out your tarry impacted ideas. Right. The rain. The wind comes in. This is the wind here, you know, one of these guys. And about 40% of it goes over and about 60% of it goes into the forest, edge of the forest. And within 100 metres is barely measurable, and in 1,000 metres has no effect whatsoever. It's absolutely still 1,000 metres in. Now, the wind comes in. Imagine the southeasterly today. You know, it will drive great fleets of galleons carrying thousands of tons of cargo, thousands of miles effortlessly. It goes into the forest and disappears. Shit! Imagine all those galleons sailing into this forest and just stopping. What does the forest do with the wind? Don't ask a forester that. So the trees accept the wind and they take it in to the interior of the forest and they eat it. Yeah. They eat it. And a little bit of it appears as 1 or 2 degrees temperature rise in the forest. But a lot of it seems to appear in the peripheral trees as wood. So that's pretty miraculous transformation. That's better than loaves and fishes, isn't it? Turning wind into wood. Okay? That's more of a miracle than anything I know about. Because if we tether a tree in the wind, which we curious Australians have done, we've taken very straight, even trees and we've tethered them there with a tyre on them, then it just stops growing down here. So you get a Popeye tree. And if we let the tether go, it just falls over. So it's obvious that the thickness of the tree is largely determined by the amount of movement it's given by the wind. So the tree eats the wind and turns it into wood.
Yeah, they tell you to unstrap them after about.
Well, we've run them for many years. But after 6 years, we unstrap them. Down they go because they're too heavy up top. Right. And we tried to keep them tethered for a long time, and gradually we lost all of them. They all fell over, you know. But we were satisfied that wind, it becomes wood. How wind becomes wood is not yet quite clear. So, okay, in goes the wind, and the wind is carrying a tremendous load of particles, tonnages of particles. Some of the load carried by the wind is passive and some is active. But here it's quite typical to find, especially in Texas, on the edge of the forest, on the edge of the great cities, erosion blows. But as you come into the forest, the soil rises and then falls away. And this was silt carried by the air. And that effect is very plain if you still have forest standing on the edge of cultivated lands. So a lot of dust, like thousands of tons of dust, comes in and settles out relatively quickly. But some of it is settling out for perhaps 100 metres in, because it's very light, some of it. So it drops out the dust, and it also drops out things that are active, things that can fly. So sometimes beetles are dropping out, and the wind may have a big load of frozen insects too, some winds, and they drop out too. Right. So sometimes one or two whole clouds, the dark clouds you see, are simply totally frozen insects. There's very little water in them. There might be 30,000 tons of insects in a single cloud. Have you seen the birds going up in the afternoon wind spirals? They're going up for ice cream. Right. So here comes the wind load, and it drops out in the forest, and that adds a tremendous amount of exotic nutrients. You know, it adds proteins and it adds minerals and a lot of stuff to the forest. So the forest is gaining a lot from stopping the wind. It's actually taking its cargo away, and it's releasing the wind, warmed up, moistened, and free of particles back out into the air. And it's coming out the crown, and actually it comes out the crown often in much the same places. So if you're looking at a hill across there and you watch the mists rising out of it, it's usually out of the same places in the forest. So it has little air emission systems. And if you're lucky enough on a day of very low cloud to be in a hill like this and see the mists rising from the forest, they rise about the same spacing as whirlwinds rise from the desert. That is, they're about half a kilometre apart, about half a mile apart, and they're quite regular. So you see them as a set of spaced strings ascending to the cloud base. This is warmed, cleaned air, humidified, joining the cloud base. You can photograph it, except the light is always bad, because it's when the cloud base is so low and you're below it and can look down on the vast forest, you'll see these spirals rising out. And they would rise out at the same spacing as a Hellishore cell, or no, not a Hellishore cell. Here's a guy to boil wax on a plate. They rise out, they form a hexagon like bees. They'll rise out exactly the same way that mud cracks. They'll come out at 3 junctions of the mud cracks out of the forest. So what are the mud cracks in the forest? I ask myself. What are the cell walls of the forest air system? Obviously the forest has air cells. What are those air cells? Don't ask a forester. Knows nothing about all those things. What do foresters know about? Wood? Dried wood.
Can I ask about, do you get any of these benefits if you just set up a windbreak? Do you get soil accumulation?
Patience.
Okay.
Yes, you will. You get probably the heaviest accumulation just with a 5-tree windbreak. And after that, there's less and less drops out. But if you look at the edge of the forest, I've often done it. Walk into the forest, you go over a mound, and it tapers off slowly on the inward side. But it never entirely, there's still stuff settling out, probably 1,000 metres in. Yards in. Okay, that goes through. No, we've sort of dealt with this. This is swallowed. 60% is eaten by the forest. The wind eaters. Look at them, look at them. This goes over, and what is this doing? There's 40% that goes over. Look at it. What's it doing? It's shaking the crowns of the trees. So what is it doing on the crown of the tree? What could the wind be picking up there off the crown of the trees? Yeah, dust, pollen, insects, decaying matter, and most importantly, every one of these trees has thousands of colonies of bacteria. And they're often the same sorts of bacteria over a whole genera of trees. So it's shaking off the bacterial colonies and whistling them away into the general atmosphere. The most important things that the tree returns to the air, except water, are bacteria. It's true to say that if we analyse the rainfall and look in the raindrops for nuclei, about 90% of nuclei is organic matter. Only 10% is inorganic. Rain will fall on the basis of the ice forming around a salt crystal, luckily. It will not form around sulfur crystals or particulate matter from exhaust gases, but most of it forms about bacteria. Most of those bacteria are the bacteria found on the crowns of trees. There's a bacterium called Pseudomonas syringae. And it is a little hard circular bacteria. It has little spikes on it. And those spikes are precisely placed to cause condensation of ice in that sort of 5-star thing of snowflakes. 6, is it? 6. Right. So these are made to create ice. So they leave the trees and join the cloud base, both on that warm updraft and from this turbulence on the crowns. So that the tree removes the load from 60% of the wind and adds the load to 40% of the wind. So it's all the time it's translating. It's changing. What's coming in is not what's going out. The forest, doesn't let anything go out. It changes the loads. Now this one is the most important cloud cedar. It occurs very thickly on coffee plantations. So when you've got the coffee pickers going through the Kenyan plantations and shaking the bushes, then it starts to thunder and storm downstream. And the tea dust very good. There are several other rain nuclei. Right now in the skies of the United States, there are 200 or 300 planes up there spreading silver nitrate so it'll rain. And there are as many planes up there spreading chemicals to mop up the silver nitrate. And depends which insurance firm they're working for. But any day of the year, there are at least 300 planes up there trying to make it rain or stop it raining. So I'm told by people who know. Yeah. But you could go to the top of the hill, strew a lot of leaves around, do a sun dance in a circle of dry leaves, and you can make it rain. You just got to stamp long enough on dry leaves and you get it rain. Some hills are rain folky. I've photographed them. Some here in the high basin. Clouds just stream off, expand and rain like crazy away from those hills. So that's where you do your sun dance. And what are you throwing on the fire? What sort of plants are you throwing on the fire? You know? Rattling your little branches and stamping on the ground and chanting, having a fire there. Of course it's going to bloody rain. You could go up there with a shotgun and just fire silver nitrate in there and get it over with. But you wouldn't get as much exercise out of it. And not half as much fun, would you? We could do rain dances. Tea. We could take our old tea leaves up and, you know, stamp around in a big patch of tea leaves, and they'd pay us for that. Well, some people wouldn't pay us. Some insurance companies would be up there trying to damp out our tea leaves because they're insured for a show or a circus downwind of us. Right. It's very interesting that this is such an important ice nuclei because it's the first organism in history to be mutated and released in the wild. And it was released in the wild in California. Looks like this. Oh, they turned it into a smooth ball and let it go. Why do you think the important reason was for that? Did they want to stop rain throughout the world?
Protect the strawberries.
To stop frost settling on strawberry leaves. So if it stops raining one day, you'll know it's also stopped frosting the strawberries. Okay? I mean, what we're doing biologically, we're risking, you know, obliteration for what I'd say a trivial end. Only poor old Rifkin protested. Nobody else was interested. Jeremy was raging up and down there saying, no, don't let that go. But anyhow, nobody said, yeah, why not? You know, we don't want frost on our strawberries. And there's another thing about stupidity. Only stupid things become extinct, really. Apart from the fact that rigorously applied stupidity becomes evil, only really stupid things become extinct. It's true. Lack of information makes you extinct. Right, over it goes. Okay, we get turbulence here, we get turbulent flow, and up go the essential rain nuclei. And most of that now comes from trees. Most of the nuclei in rain is tree generated. Most of it then are part of the bacterial colony. Boy, it's busy out there, isn't it, all the time? Yeah. I mean, you think trees are lazy just standing there? Shit. Right. Now, what else is in the wind? The wind comes in at very, very different humidities, you know, plus or minus, you know, 40% humidity or something. If it goes in at low humidity, the forest will re-humidify it. The forest generally can add about 15% to the humidity there, as a general figure. So very dry winds go into the forest. It's rehumidified partly. After 5 kilometres, it's back to full humidity. So it takes quite a few miles for you to sop up desert air and put it back into rainfall situation. So if you want to stop deserts on the desert borders, you've got to have at least 5k belt of trees. Of trees, 5k wide. Yeah, 5 miles good enough. I mean, I wouldn't argue if you put 5 miles and I put 5k. We'll probably get rain coming out the other side. Okay, so but if the air comes in at excess humidity, as it will at night when it's been a rainy day or something, then the tree will remove that humidity. And this is a critically important function of forests. At night, the tree will be a little cooler than the incoming air often, and it starts condensing water at about 5 quarts a square metre, something like that. Condensation. And you would have to find out here what that adds to the rainfall. But on all coasts, it far exceeds the rainfall. Some areas like Western Tasmania, 83% of our total precipitation is condensation. Only 17% is rainfall. So it is by far the most important source of water on Earth. Condensation from forests. High forests, fog forests. Go to Maui and walk up into the forest, into the fog forest, and it's just constantly dripping, raining on the Earth there all day and all night. Go to Berkeley, sit up top of Contra Costa, sit on a big tree, and when the sea air comes in, it's dripping all out. You've got to move your table out, take your beer out from under the tree. It dilutes your Jim Beam. That's the trouble with condensation. You've been there, haven't you, sitting under those dripping trees at night? Yeah.
I was confused when we were talking about 2 different major creations of rain or water sources. One is condensation.
No, that's not rain. That's a component of precipitation. So is rain. Condensation is not rain. Condensation, rain comes from clouds. Condensation comes from cool surfaces. Your windows, wire fences, trees, shade cloth, all will condense moisture from the air.
So is there a cycle of water that's going on within the forest itself that may or may not enter back into the atmosphere?
Yeah, there's always an atmospheric exchange, and it's vigorous and constant between trees and the atmosphere and the cloud base. Something not mentioned if you've ever studied meteorology, and still quite hotly denied by meteorologists, that trees can have any influence on weather, because it never got into their course. That's why. You've got to deny it. If you didn't get it in your course, you've got to say it didn't happen, right? Incredible to say that. Okay, we haven't finished with the wind. This 40% that rose up over the forest compressed the streamlines in the air, which you understand, just as a rocket compresses streamlines away from its nose. It compresses the streamlines for a height of 40 times the height of the tree. Okay? So if the tree is only 40 feet high, the effect ends at 1,600 feet, well above the cloud base. Therefore, the bump, it causes basically orographic rain. Now, that component of the rain, given by people who have measured it to trees, because of the lift of the air over the trees, is 40% of the rainfall. Put that down. So if we go to to areas where they have studied this, and there are only 3 in the world, the Netherlands, Sweden and Tasmania, have put out thousands of rain gauges in the lee of little windbreaks and things. And we get 3 rains, and they're all overturned rains after the edge. All of them are caused by the orographic lift over the tree edges. And that's 40% of all rain. And they occur in bands parallel to the trees, but 15 degrees off, each one being more 15 degrees that way. Same as the Coriolis force. So instead of actually falling dead parallel with the trees, they keep altering their angle. So there's 3 bands of rain, each 15 degrees off the direction of the wind.
So what happens after it turns around 90 degrees?
If we kept coming, I wondered, could we bring the wind round and sort of... I wondered if could we make a great gyre. What we could do is make very much the same as we make on coasts. We could put 2 rows of hedges like that and bring those winds to a fantastic force here. We can do it with waves. We can run waves up 70, 90-foot cliffs like that. We could do that with trees. Nobody's done it, but we could do it.
Well, I was thinking if it keeps turning 50
Yeah.
degrees after
But if you do it both ways,
such
right?
turns, it's now feeding into the
Yeah,
oncoming wind.
I know.
So what would-
I actually put a speculation somewhere. I've written it somewhere. Could we create a great gyre? And we probably could. You probably wouldn't notice it. The wind would just go on.
It'd rain, it'd be a stationary rain.
Imagine.
That's what the creationists say
What
happened.
could we do? That's what the creationists say happened.
There was a great canopy, and then it collapsed.
Oh my God. We cut the bloody trees down and stopped it raining forever.
And we got the Sahara Desert.
Wow, imagine. Yeah.
Question additional to that.
Hmm?
Can you tell the timeline again that goes back and forth and what's 50 degrees off the what?
There's the direction of the wind, and the rain bands should fall, at 90 degrees to the wind as they come over like that. But whenever anything spirals, it sort of slews. So it actually, the 15 degree, that's a constant. If you put a rock in a stream, and a stream flows past, and you get a turbulence, whirlpools, offset each side, those whirlpools at 15 degrees across the stream. Whenever you get turbulence, whether it's going that way or that way, it will be 15 degrees across the flow that causes turbulence. I think it's a Coriolis effect. Anyhow, we can say it's a Coriolis effect because we don't bloody well understand what else might do it. Nobody's suggested why that's a constant. So if you cut the trees down, and particularly as you clear your ridges and you follow your rain gauges, you'll see a 40% drop in rainfall as the ridges are cleared. Okay? Now that many of us have measured. We've done that very well in Tasmania. We've followed the photographs of the clearing, we've followed the rain records, and that's the effect you get. Right. And if you place your rain gauges very thickly, that's a component of rain additional to the general rains, is 40%, caused by orographic uplift at the edge of trees of 40 feet height or more. Some uplift occurs at much lower heights, but then you've got to have a low cloud base. Okay.
Spell orograph.
Yeah. Oro, O-R-O, graphic, G-R-A-P-H-I-C, or if you're American, G-R-A-F-I-C. God, you've got to be with you've got to carry a constant bloody translator in here. It's not a very good one, but...
I want to ask you about the humid wind blowing into the forest.
Right.
Presumably the condensation is caused because it's cool, right?
Yes, that's right. It cools because the leaves are mainly water.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then the question I had is, what happens to all that condensation? Do the leaves suck up a bunch of it?
No, it drips. it comes off. In fact, so much of it comes off that if you go to the Canary Islands, there is no rain. All the precipitation is condensation. And all the remote villages have to plant a tree called Alcatea foetens, which they call the rain tree. And around the tree, they have stone cisterns which lead to the village tank. So the villagers actually depend for their lives on the existence of the rain trees. A factor used, I have to say, by the conquistadores, who busily cut down the rain trees to, the Guanche people lived off the rain trees. So when the Spanish came and they wanted to bring in the remote Guanche, they cut down the rain trees. And there were pitiful attempts to hide these trees. The Guanche actually thatched them over and dusted them over, but of course they're easy to find. Yeah. But if you read the history of the conquest of the Canaries, you'll find the rain tree figures large. It's like kind of cutting the water pipes to the city. Kind of killing the buffalo. Well, these are cooler too because they've been evaporating water, so they're relatively cooler than airstreams. So they're good condensers, trees. And it doesn't seem to me to be much different between conifers and broadleaves. But the renowned condensers are shiny leaf broadleaf trees. What are those two leaves you put in custard to flavour it? Yeah. Bay leaves. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just lost your traditions, that's all. Face it. You don't put a bay leaf in your custard, you're right off the wall. You've got to get back to your European tribal roots. Get that bay leaf back in your custard. And, you've got to get the ash back in your porridge to get back to your Indian roots and so on, You're just leaving out all these essential good things. Handful of ash in your porridge, a bay leaf in your custard, Couple of gum leaves in your tea. Okay. So, there belongs to the bay family, laurel family, Lauraceae, the Lauraceae condensers, yeah. Evergreen, glossy leaf trees with large spreading crowns. And they are so good that it is much wetter on the windward side of those trees. In fact, it's very typical to find little bogs on the windward side and very dry soil on the leeward side. They're very, very efficient, and they alter the soil moisture in two ways. One is that on the windward side, they condense most of the moisture, falls off the crown there, and less on the leeward side. And the leeward side too, there's slightly lower pressure from the wind, and so more is sucked out there too. So across a clump of trees, there is a huge soil moisture difference. So if you want to move around that clump, you can find totally different habitat for roots. You can put tamaracks one side in the bog, and you can put olives on the other. That you notice, when I was up on the reservation at Pyramid Lake with the Shoshone people, I walked out one morning, there'd been a heavy sort of foggy ground wind. I said to them, look, you've got to plant on the leeward side of your tussocks because there's over a foot of water in the sands on the leeward side. But on the other side, the sand was dry. So we found out where to plant our trees, looking around. So watch it. One side of the tree is not the same as another. And if we lay out a hackberry guild for you, when I say to you the things are oriented north, south, east and west, they're probably oriented wet, dry, shady, hot. Go. Okay, so satisfied with the wind? Big loads coming in on the wind, big loads being returned to the wind, totally different loads. What comes in is not what comes out. That's a general rule of nature. That's the first rule of nature. What goes in is not what comes out. And the second one is the higher the fewer. The higher the fewer. Serves me right. God did that to me.